The agenda this week talked mental health with Olympian Clara Hughes, considered cybersecurity in Ontario and as a threat to the global system, heard about the troubling tactics of electronic games, and reflected on the future of the Canadian news media. The agenda's week in review begins with the state and fate of Airbnb in Ontario's capital city. We had in the province of Ontario last year 15,000 Airbnb hosts, which was up from 11,000 the previous year. We can assume we're going to be at 20,000 pretty shortly.
Yes.
You've not got 20,000 bylaw inspectors that you can send all over the city to make sure everybody's complying. Compliance is going to be next to impossible on this, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for most cities who have created these their own bodies of regulation is compliance enforcement. And the City of Toronto is not going to be able to send out those inspectors. They're not hotel facilities where you know that there's 24 hours security, there's going to be someone at the door that's going to greet you. That is not the case. You have to go through a security checkpoint with the front desk, then you have to find the on-site property manager or the owner. That's going to be much more difficult. And I think that, even though there may not be, I want to just come back to this point, I think it's really important, there may not be some direct correlation with research about the impact on affordable housing. I think the fact that 180,000 individuals are already on the wait list in the City of Toronto for some form of affordable housing should tell us that that list has been growing, and it's been growing almost in lockstep in some ways with the exponential expansion of the popularity of the Airbnb platform. For every single Airbnb unit that's on the market for rent for short-term accommodations, whether it's 1 week or 10 days, that means that there's that one unit, even if it's not rented out, that's not available for a family to rent and build roots in Toronto. And so, yes, the Airbnb operator may get a premium, maybe they get a bit of flexibility, but I think we also have to evaluate what are we trading off, because it is very, very difficult to live in one of the most expensive cities in Toronto. You take out those units of accommodation as rental options for those families and individuals that want to build long-term roots in Toronto, you are actually making things much more difficult.
So as an individual, you can improve yourself, but there's a societal imperative that also has to be taken into account.
Yes, and we want to build a new convention center. We want to expand our tourism facilities. I can't stress this enough. You cannot do this on the back of Airbnbs. Like, you just cannot.
Yuri, you wanted to say, and then we'll get Linda.
Well, again, there's absolutely a housing affordability crisis, but if you were to shut down, for instance, Airbnb, then it just means that that home that is now 90 days on the market is no longer on the market. Exactly. That house does not become available suddenly, magically, for someone who needs affordable housing. That's not and that's the overwhelming majority.
But there is a very important
I think that we have to make that clear.
Okay, let the councillor respond, and then Linda.
So there is a very important factor for us to consider, is that there are property managers who've taken it upon themselves to now rent out perhaps these units on their own, and then what they're doing is they're subleasing them on the very, very short-term rental, and we're seeing them all over downtown Toronto, all over North York, and that's actually one of the biggest challenges, is that the property owner, the ultimate owner, doesn't even know who they've rented it out to. And by the time you get and this is no disrespect, but we are knowing this is actually a major problem with our condominiums, is that by the time the property owner finds out that they have rented out to a tenant who has then sublet it onto Airbnb and the short-term rentals, they've breached the condominium rules and regulations, they've destabilized the building, the accountability checkpoints become fewer and fewer and murkier and murkier. So the owner may not even know that that's what's happened to their unit, and they thought they were renting it to one person.
Linda, right here.
Steve, as you know, I've been a realtor since 1979. And that was what gave me the insight to create the COA in March of 2010. And this has been an ongoing problem. Our market right now is in a very tough situation. As far as anything staying on the market for 90 days is impossible. We have Ontarians, Torontonians who are trying to buy property. They can't. We have people out there that are trying to find rentals. They can't. A standard unit that could have been up for $1,800 a month 2 months ago are no longer available because they're now at 1950 because Airbnb has taken away our housing. And that is from a long-term veteran that knows this market inside out.
you can't
We have
put-
a huge problem.
Okay, but Linda, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So you
No,
can't just
because-
ban this. We've got to
no,
come up with
the
something else,
problem-
right?
See, the problem is that we don't have, one of the biggest things is like right now, as far as working with the city, the COA is ready and willing to work with the city. We work with every building in the city, like around Ontario. The property management companies will tell us exactly which ones are Airbnb or Hotel.com or whichever one that they are. And that way we know. They don't go in there with pure honesty. Okay, you get owners and subtenants and everyone else coming to property management, trying every which way, giving a bogus fob, saying, oh, this is not working. Can you please reinstate this fob? Because they want 3 fobs, 4 fobs, 5 fobs. They're trying to circumvent the system every time they turn around because they're making money and they don't want to stop making the
Let's
money.
go Lisa, then Terry.
Yeah, so I can respond to a couple of these things. We agree with regulation. We are actually, as speaking as a short-term rental host and a property manager, first of all, my company's on the up and up. We only work with owners, and the owners actually have permission from their condo boards to do this. The other thing is that a lot of the housing that we're talking about is not in fact affordable. I had to move out of the city because I couldn't afford the rents here in the city. And I don't see that as a result of our Airbnb pricing or anything, because people that want to do this sort of subterfuge and sublet and all of that you're talking about, we don't agree with that and we don't support that kind of circumventing the rules.
I want to find out how you first got connected with this, with Let's Talk, which is 2011 we're going back to now, yes?
Yeah, and it really was after the Vancouver Olympics. Bell Canada was my main sponsor. They had been for a number of years. And after I skated my last Olympic race, I came in third and won one of those beautiful Vancouver medals that are like the mountains and the sea and the beautiful artwork on them. I had a chance to travel around Canada and share with Bell employees, with George Cope, the CEO, on the roadshow, what the Olympics were to Canada, and of course the corporation as well. There a lot of work went into those Olympics to make sure all the photo finishes were transmitted, the fastest speed, all of that. But what I learned on that roadshow was that Bell Canada was taking on mental health as their only focus for charitable giving and advocacy. And I actually asked to be a part of it. I learned about Let's Talk and about really, putting their name on a building on CAMH and learning that corporations hadn't done that when it comes to mental health facilities and hospitals. All of this stuff I had never considered. And what I did know, though, clearly was I had my own lived experience. My family does, so many of my friends and my teammates. It's something that I felt was affecting everyone around me. And then I started thinking about how nobody was talking about it, and maybe my story would help someone, I hoped.
Nobody
and,
was talking about it because why?
Because of the stigma, because of the misunderstanding, lack of education. And I also think, it goes from institutionalized mental health care in hospitals that were essentially the door was locked and the key was thrown away for somebody who was suffering from psychological illness or living with one of those afflictions, to more community-based care, outpatient care. So I think the campaign has definitely helped bring the conversation to light, but I know that there have been people working for decades to do just that, to bring this front and center to Canadians' minds. So I think the foundation was set and it was ready. We were ready for somebody to take this on, and Bell did it.
It's certainly given the issue prominence that it otherwise would not have had.
Yeah.
But are there other tangible benefits that you've seen over the last 7 years since this has started?
Absolutely. I mean, almost $80 million has been injected into the work of anti-stigma and to the work of breaking down the walls that prevent people from getting help, that make people suffer in silence and the lives that are lost. That work has been done. Workplace mental health has improved drastically. There's been the national standard for workplace mental health. There was a national, what we can strive to be, a national mental health strategy that was written in 2012. Queen's University has the only worldwide chair for mental health and anti-stigma research that was just renewed yesterday at Queen's University. Another $1 million, another 5 years to go into Dr. Heather Stewart's work that is really shaking things up. So not to mention all the community grants. This money's been injected into good places, and as a spokesperson, I I've had the chance to go out in the field and meet people that are doing the work, that are getting the funds, and not just from Bell, from RBC, from many corporations, and also sometimes the government to implement the work and the programs that are really helping people.
In the midst of that first answer, you said you had your own lived experience with it, which is what helped steer you towards this and presumably made you feel you could make a contribution to it. When somebody first brought up the notion to you that, Clara, I think you're demonstrating all of the symptoms of somebody suffering from depression, what was your reaction to that?
That's not me. It's not me. You're not going to tell me what's wrong with me. And it was a doctor who told me that. And, I went from winning 2 Olympic bronze medals to, it was probably December after the Olympics that summer. I'd put on at least 35 pounds. I was crying uncontrollably. I was sleeping many, many hours a night and unable to do my job of training and literally out of control. And then I honestly thought I just had to be more disciplined. What was wrong with me is that I was lazy, that I was out of shape, and I had to make myself better. And so having that first introduction to being educated on what someone saw in me, first there was a revolt because I didn't want to become that. I didn't want to be sick. Because being sick for me, I had seen with people around me, and it scared me. It scared me, and it confused me.
How does an Olympic medal winner, though, get to a point where she thinks that she's lazy?
Oh, this doesn't even come from sport. This goes like, you should come and, you need to talk to my psychologist to fully understand, but really so many struggles people have are rooted in early childhood trauma. And for me, it comes from coming from a dysfunctional family. My mom and dad did the best that they could, but my dad had an alcohol problem that really affected our household. Our family broke up, and it was an abusive environment as well, verbally, and that's what I grew up with. And as a child, I internalized all those things happening as my fault. I couldn't fix them. And when you're 5 years old and you feel that way, you carry that guilt with you in everything you do. So when I say those words were planted at a very young age. And they're what probably drove me to be good at something, and that something became sport. As a young person, it drove me to be delinquent and drink and do drugs and just
Affected your sister too.
Exactly. It affected both of us. And sport really got me off that track and off that path. But I entered a new path of destruction that culminated with my first Olympics and winning those medals and then hitting rock bottom after.
Eddie, as part of your mission, you got Alan Gregg, who, of course, used to do a program here for many, many years. You got him out doing some public opinion surveys for you on how concerned people were about the state of legacy media in this country today. What did he find out?
Well, they are very respectful of journalism. They think the news is very important, and they associate journalism very strongly with democracy. In fact, they associate so strongly with democracy that they worry somehow or another it might be corrupted if, in some way, government gets too closely involved.
So you're encouraged by the fact that the public seems to think journalists and journalism are good?
Yeah, I was very encouraged that they see the linkage between journalism and democracy, that they see that they need to be reported on their rights, that they want to be informed. Even those who say they get most of their news off Facebook went, well, except if it's really important. And then they want to go to, I think, what we would call a trusted source, but they would actually name news outlets, name anchors, name journalists.
So they do prefer, when it's important, say the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star over Huffington Post and BuzzFeed. Is that right?
When it is important, what they consider important, they don't want to have to check in every day. They don't want to be responsible for paying for it, which is, of course, a problem.
Well,
but they do recognize that there are times when they need it, they want it, it's good for them.
I mean, that's a great segue to get me to the next part, because 9% of Canadians apparently are prepared to pay for their news online. And I guess the question is, do you think it's possible to convince the other 91% that it might be in their interest to do so as well?
Well, no. In 1995, 50% of Canadians were taking a paid newspaper, so I suppose maybe that would be a grand aspiration to get back up to that number. I don't think we'll ever get back to that kind of number, and I'm not too sure that readers are going to finance what is needed of journalism by themselves, just like advertising is no longer going to finance it adequately.
There's apparently a lot of people in this country who are very satisfied to read free, low-quality news sites, and therefore any notion that they'd be prepared to pay for something more is fanciful?
What I kept saying of them in the focus groups was they would say, I need these sites. I want these sites to exist. When I turn to them, I want there to be something there. I want to know that there's actually a site I can go to that actually sent reporters out on those things that matter to me. I want to know that they're going to have facts, not just opinion. But, you know, I don't really want to pay for that. And they would feel guilty about that. They'd feel a little shamefaced about that. But nonetheless, that was their view.
Because the reality is we're in a culture of free these days.
That's right.
Seems to be.
So somebody else is going to have to pay. They want to be free riders.
Well, you did ask whether or not the government ought to have a role in fixing this, and 25% thought that the government should step in, but 54% were opposed to it. 75% expressed concern that journalists, if they got public money, wouldn't be impartial. And 68% worried the same thing about news organizations, that they might not be impartial if they got public money. So is government funding or a government subsidy basically a non-starter here?
Well, I'd say two things about it. First off, the more they know about crisis in newspapers, the more open they are to different kinds of solutions. Nonetheless, we felt that it was incumbent upon us to try to design a program that's respectful of that because, you know, as journalists, we feel the same way that the public feels, right? We don't want the government too deeply involved in our lives, our newsrooms. Now, there's always been policy, CBC's policy, TV Ontario was policy. There's a special section of the Income Tax Act, which is for the media, which is policy. But we tried to design this in a way that there would be independence in a source of money and independence in how that money was allocated, and the government would be as distant as possible from any decisions.
Let's follow up on that. You have talked about creating a Future of Journalism and Democracy Fund. What is that?
Well, that is a fund that would be discretionary, and people could apply to that for either journalistic projects they want to do, for the development of journalistic organizations, for digital development, because, you know, these organizations, you opened by mentioning the legacy press. I don't really like the term legacy press because the legacy press is trying not to be the legacy press.
What do you prefer?
I prefer traditional or incumbent in many ways, and that's where the vast majority of news is still created in this day. Original news comes, you know, largely from there. So we need that part of the news to work, but we also want you know, new entrants into the field with creativity. So all of those people who are struggling, but will put journalistic boots on the ground in some way, because that's the real shortage, or will have innovative ways of using data journalism or other things, and they need some money to get over the top to do this. That would be the use of the fund, and then it would have some special initiatives attached to it, such as financing a local initiative with Canadian Press, an Indigenous news initiative with APTN, a legal services initiative where you could get legal advice for operations that are probably too small to normally hire lawyers, and doing investigative journalism and that sort. So all of those things would be financed out of the fund as well.
Well, let me pluck one of the cast of characters out of your book, somebody by the name of Molly, who described herself as being in a machine zone. What did she mean by that?
Well, the machine zone, it was something I kept hearing over and over again. Sometimes they just called it the zone. And we hear this a lot sometimes from athletes or dancers or painters talking about getting in the zone. And they mean something somewhat similar to that. It's a state, a mental state in which time falls away, space falls away, and importantly for the gamblers, a sense of monetary value disappears, and sometimes even a sense of self. So, just awareness of other people, everything drops away, and you're just in that loop with the machine. And interestingly, when you're in the zone, that's what you're playing for. You're not sitting there playing to win. You're not hoping to win. This is an extreme misperception that legislators have, that the media has, that the rest of the lay public has. They say, these poor people, didn't they take a probability class? Don't they know they're not going to win? We need to educate them. It's not really a question of education. The experience that they've had with these machines has clued them in to something else that they're getting from that experience, which is the zone itself. And this point was really driven home for me once when another gambler by the name of Shannon told me, it's so strange, but sometimes when I win, I get really tense and really frustrated and almost angry. And I heard this over and over again in my interviews. And really what was going on was that winning interrupted the zone. It interrupted the flow of play because the machine freezes up. Suddenly there's music, suddenly people are looking at you. You're back in time, you're back in space, you're exactly where you don't want to be.
So it's about getting to that altered state, I guess. And is it, so it is, I feel like a lawyer here in court for a second. It is your testimony then that these machines are actually designed to be so addictive that people will get to an altered state and never want to leave them. Is that the idea?
There is one thing I would shift that came at the beginning of that statement, which is they are designed to make them so addictive. The original intention in the sort of the boardrooms and the design laboratories behind these machines is not to addict people. It's to make the most profit-earning machines possible, to increase the bottom line. And if you think about it, Las Vegas and other casinos are like giant laboratories, and you can pretty quickly, rapidly get things from the laboratory out onto the floor and see how they earn. And the features that earn higher will stick, and those that don't will drop away. You know, this is kind of how McDonald's invented the hamburger. They weren't hiring scientists, they were watching where the lines were longest. So by, sort of by accident, you could say, or through this kind of intensive experimentation, the formula they've hit upon happens to be one that's highly addictive, but the intention was to make the most money possible, as you would expect from businesses in capitalist United States or elsewhere.
Some people have said that we have these slot machines, it's a metaphor of course, in our pockets now, in as much as anybody who's got a smartphone, BlackBerry, iPhone, whatever, basically has an addictive slot machine on their person all the time now. What do you think of that analogy?
Well, I actually use that analogy myself in the opening pages of my book, but I do it with a very light touch. Since my book came out, many others have seized upon this idea, and they're doing it with a heavier hand. But I do agree with them. They're often making the points for me because they're more experts in games like Candy Crush or some of these Zynga games on Facebook, for instance. The kind of things you'll see, I live here in New York on the subway in the morning. You'll see people just in their devices in some kind of a similar zone. And if you think about it, those qualities I told you about earlier, solitude, speed, and continuity, are all present in these little games. It's just you and the device, you're setting the pace, you are in this kind of loop with the machine, and you can get really caught in them, very similar to the slot machine. It's also a sense of never knowing what's going to happen next. So a sort of uncertainty that's pulling you along. You want to reveal what is the next game and the next game and the next game. This is very compelling.
So Natasha, do I have this right then, that the design principles used in slot machines may in fact be the same design principles for Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or any of these other very popular apps?
Absolutely. Even something like Facebook photo clicking. These activities are also incredibly compelling and absorbing because there's this sort of little window of uncertainty. And to open that window, you need to keep clicking or pressing or play another game. And your attention is just tunneled into these things.
Who are the major nation-state cyber powers in the world today?
Well, there's no doubt that the United States has incredible offensive and, to some degree, defensive capabilities. But there's also true that states like China, Russia are developed capabilities and have shown a capacity and willingness to use them over the previous few years. But this is an area that's continuing to grow, and smaller nations, Iran and North Korea, are also building up their capacity to act in the cyber domain.
Robert, if that's the case, do these cyber capabilities of these smaller countries give them far more heft on the world stage than they otherwise might merit?
I think that's very true. So we even saw this in the lead up to the nuclear negotiations between Iran and the U.S., where Iranian operators broke into a number of locations around the U.S. in hopes of extra political leverage. So I absolutely think that these are capabilities being leveraged to try to tilt the scales a bit.
Melissa, can you just sort of amplify on that a bit? It used to be that, if you had the biggest army in the world, you were the scariest dude on the block. Not the case anymore?
No, it's not the case anymore. There's more than 100 countries that are capable, cyber capable, and it presents a great asymmetric capability that for the more connected you are as a country and the more dependent upon you are on the internet, the more you have to lose. And so therefore, those countries who are less connected but still have the capabilities can leverage a lot of harm.
Ben, we have heard you refer to the Chinese as loud burglars. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the reputation of the Chinese in the first decade of the 2000s was loud burglar jewel thieves, in that they would break in, they had a clear economic incentive to take intellectual property, but they maybe didn't spend as much time as some other more sophisticated actors in covering their tracks. Now, it's hard to generalize across all Chinese activity. There certainly is a range of capacities, but that probably was a generalization that held true for quite a while there.
John, the one country we haven't heard listed yet is Canada. Where are we in all of this?
Well, Canada looks very good on paper. The United Nations ITU lists Canada as number 2 behind the United States. But when you actually look at what's being done and the activities and the threats that Canada faces, the situation is a little more murky. Canada has not updated its strategy since 2010. The Snowden documents in 2013 have raised a lot of questions about what CSE is actually doing, and a lot of firms are really worried about their competitiveness in the cyber age.
Now, if we get hacked, does the Canadian government give people in our country permission to hack back?
Well, no. Hacking back is still considered a crime in the United States. It could be prosecuted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. There's similar statutes in Canada. So that is not allowed, but it certainly happens a great deal.
Melissa, I heard you trying to get in.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things, Canada is in the middle of updating its strategy and just has had a call for papers from industry and starting to think about how and struggle with these particular challenges. How does industry defend itself? Canada just also recently stood up the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange to promote that information sharing, to increase the defensive posture of both the private sector and the public sector. And so I think you're going to start to see things in Canada change over the next coming months. Under Prime Minister Trudeau, they're going to announce a new policy, and I think you're going to see some new activities in Canada.
And new activities meaning we'll get better at this, or what?
I think that it's a renewed focus for Canada, and I think that there's going to be significant investment in both capability and manpower.
Understood. Robert, let me take you overseas for a second, because I think you were the first on the scene to investigate something that happened in Ukraine in 2015, an attack on the power grid there. What happened?
Yeah, so I got to be one of the investigators for that attack, and ultimately what happened is a foreign power broke into the Ukrainian power grid and ultimately leveraged the grid systems against themselves. So it was a cyber attack, but it also used these industrial control environments to ensure that the power was out across 3 different regions of Ukraine.
And do they know who did it?
So there's a lot of speculation. I think attribution in this domain is easier than some people make it, but still very difficult. All the signs do point to Russia, especially with the ongoing conflict, but without proper evidence, I think we should probably lay off the attribution discussion for that specific case.
A Hydra One IP address was likely compromised by the same Russian hackers that recently got into the Democratic National Committee memory banks and kind of ruined that election for Hillary Clinton. I want to know how concerning that ought to be to us.
Well, it should be, because it is also part of a larger problem, and in fact, a very, very deep problem. So the IP address that was apparently or reportedly compromised in itself was not important. It was a disused item that was probably one of thousands, if not tens of thousands, around the globe that hostile intelligence services use to either as a jumping off point for an attack or perhaps a data dump site later on. The larger issue, however, is that people have to start recognizing the pervasiveness of cyber threats from nation states, from organized criminal groups, to young persons and older persons and others who are simply working as lone actors in isolation, perhaps have with malicious intent or out of pure curiosity and just enjoy the challenge of entering into a network or a system. And then you add on to all of that, we're at the cusp of the internet of not just things, but of everything. So it's that perhaps 50 billion devices, the things that connect our fridge, our stoves, our cars. Our car will be the single most important mobile communication device that we will be in possession of. It'll be completely infused with data. So as a result, everything that has an IP address, everything has a beaking out point, becomes a potential vector or a threat target. And in the hands of of hostile entities that are very well versed, especially nation states. Some parts of the world, especially in places like Russia, there's collusion between the security apparatus and criminal organized groups. So therefore, the latter people, the criminal groups, get access to some of the best technology. And then you look at the dark web, and you look at the black market in cyber weapons, and any individual can pretty well buy any number of type of weaponized malware to either target a former spouse, a former employer, perhaps a large state entity, a bank, financial sector.
This is endless.
Name it. It is. It's a whole new world. It is the Matrix on steroids, a sort of pop culture thing. Yet it's so insidious, we don't think about it. And yet we think about terrorism over the top. And I think that's a misplaced priority to a great degree.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety on our website, tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and now, thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream, on our Periscope page at periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.